Winter Morgan's piercing scream echoed through the small cabin as another contraction gripped her body, the howling blizzard outside seeming to answer her cries with its own terrible fury. The wind rattled the wooden shutters and snow piled against the door of her isolated homestead, nestled in the foothills outside Wilcox, Arizona territory. The year was 1884, and Winter was alone, terrified, and in labor 3 weeks earlier than expected, her husband Thomas nowhere to be found. "Please, not now," she whispered through gritted teeth, clutching her swollen belly as she leaned against the rough-hewn table. Her knuckles turned white as the pain intensified. "Thomas, where are you?" Winter had known her husband was taking a risk traveling to Tucson for supplies before the winter set in, but neither of them had anticipated the ferocity of this early December storm, nor the premature arrival of their first child. Now, as the blizzard raged into its second day, she faced the terrifying prospect of delivering her baby alone in their remote cabin with no help in sight. Another contraction came, stronger than before, forcing Winter to her knees. Her long auburn hair hung in damp tendrils around her face as she tried to remember everything the midwife in town had told her. At 22, she had never witnessed a birth, much less expected to manage her own. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and in this weather it might as well have been 100. The fire in the hearth crackled and popped, the only source of comfort in the growing darkness of the afternoon. Outside, the world had disappeared behind a curtain of white, the snow accumulating in drifts that already reached halfway up the windows. Winter struggled to her feet and made her way to the bed in the corner of the one-room cabin, knowing she needed to prepare for what was coming. As she laid out clean linens with shaking hands, a sound cut through the wail of the wind hoofbeats, faint but growing louder. Hope surged within her chest. "Hello," she called out, stumbling toward the door. "Is someone there? Help me, please." The pounding on the door came seconds later, and Winter fumbled with the latch, pulling it open to reveal a tall figure, covered in snow and ice, his hat pulled low against the storm. "Madam," the stranger said, his voice deep and rough from the cold, "saw your chimney smoke." "Thought I'd check if," he stopped abruptly, taking in her condition, her face contorted with pain as another contraction seized her. "The baby," Winter gasped, clutching the doorframe for support. "It's coming." The man acted without hesitation, stepping inside and closing the door against the howling wind. He removed his snow-crusted hat, revealing a shock of dark hair and intense blue eyes set in a weathered face. "Kade Blackwell, madam," he said, already removing his heavy coat. "Where's your husband?" "Tucson," Winter managed between labored breaths. "Supply run, caught in the storm." Kade assessed the situation quickly, his expression grave. "You need a doctor. Dr. Simmons is in Wilcox." Winter shook her head desperately. "No one can make it through this storm. You barely did yourself." Cade's jaw set in determination as he helped Winter back to the bed. "I've got the strongest mount in the territory, and I know these trails better than most. I'll bring back help." Winter grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "I don't have much time," she whispered, fear evident in her green eyes. Kade nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "What's your name, madam?" "Winter," she replied. "Winter Prescott." "Well, Mrs. Prescott, I give you my word. I'll be back with the doctor before this child comes into the world." Before Winter could protest further, Kade had donned his coat and hat once more. He stoked the fire, adding several logs to ensure it would burn strong during his absence, then filled a kettle with water and placed it near the flames to heat. "Bar the door behind me," he instructed. "I'll knock 3 times when I return." And with that, he stepped back into the maelstrom, the door closing firmly behind him. Winter did as he instructed, then returned to her bed, praying that this stranger could accomplish the impossible. She had no choice but to trust him. Her baby's life, and perhaps her own, depended on it. Outside, Kade mounted his stallion, Thunderbolt, a magnificent black horse that had carried him through conditions most would deem impassable. The animal snorted, steam billowing from his nostrils as Kade urged him toward the trail leading to town. "Come on, boy," he murmured into the horse's ear. "We've got lives to save tonight." The blizzard attacked them with merciless force. Ice crystals stung Kade's face as he leaned low over Thunderbolt's neck, the wind threatening to tear him from the saddle with each powerful gust. The trail was barely visible, buried beneath nearly 2 feet of fresh snow, but Kade had ridden these paths since boyhood. He trusted his instincts and his horse's sure footing as they pushed forward into the white abyss. His mind was fixed on the woman he'd left behind. There had been something in those green eyes, a strength beyond mere determination that had struck him deeply. Kade had encountered plenty of frontier women in his 30 years, but few with such evident courage in the face of certain danger. The journey that normally took 45 minutes stretched into a brutal 2-hour battle against the elements. Twice, Thunderbolt stumbled in hidden depressions, nearly throwing Kade from the saddle. Ice formed on his eyebrows and eyelashes, his fingers growing numb despite thick leather gloves. Still, he pressed on, knowing that each passing minute was critical. When the scattered lights of Wilcox finally appeared through the curtain of snow, Kade felt a surge of relief. The small mining town was largely shuttered against the storm, most businesses closed and homes battened down. He rode directly to Dr. Simmons' house at the edge of town, practically falling from his horse as he pounded on the door. Dr. Edward Simmons was a man in his 50s, with spectacles and a trim silver beard. He answered the door with a look of astonishment. "Blackwell. What in God's name are you doing out in this hell, woman in labor?" Kade gasped, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Isolated cabin about 7 miles northeast. Husband's away. She needs help now." The doctor's expression shifted immediately to professional concern. "The Prescott place." When Kade nodded, Dr. Simmons continued, "I delivered Martha Johnson's twins last night. I haven't slept in 36 hours. "No time for sleep, Doc," Kade replied grimly. "She's alone and scared. First baby." Dr. Simmons sighed heavily but was already reaching for his medical bag. "Give me 2 minutes to gather what I need. My horse is fresh, I'll ready him." "No," Kade said firmly. "Take Thunderbolt. He knows the way back and he's the surest foot in this storm. I'll follow on yours." The doctor hesitated only briefly before nodding in agreement. "Agnes." He called to his wife. "Prepare my emergency kit. Birth complications." While the doctor gathered his supplies, Kade warmed himself briefly by the fire, accepting a cup of hot coffee from Mrs. Simmons. His thoughts returned to Winter Prescott, wondering if her time had already come. The image of her alone and in pain drove him back into action before he'd finished his drink. Within 10 minutes, they were mounted and heading back into the storm, the doctor on Thunderbolt and Kade following on the doctor's sturdy brown mare. The return journey proved even more treacherous as the storm intensified, the temperature dropping precipitously. Ice formed on the horses' manes and the men's clothing as they battled through snowdrifts that in places reached the horses' bellies. "How much farther, Doctor?" Simmons shouted over the howling wind after they'd been riding for nearly an hour. "Not far now," Kade called back, though in truth, the landscape had become so transformed by the blizzard that he was relying more on instinct than visual markers. It was Thunderbolt who ultimately led them true, the intelligent animal recognizing the path he'd traversed earlier. When the dim light of the cabin finally appeared through the swirling snow, Cade felt a profound relief wash over him. As they approached, a scream pierced the air, audible even over the storm's fury, and both men exchanged worried glances. They dismounted quickly, securing the horses in the small lean-to beside the cabin that served as a rudimentary stable. Cade pounded on the door 3 times as promised. "Mrs. Prescott, it's Kade Blackwell. I've brought the doctor." The latch lifted after a moment, and Winter stood in the doorway, her face pale and strained, her nightgown soaked with sweat despite the cold. She was clinging to the frame for support, her other hand pressed against her lower back. "Thank God," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears of relief before another contraction seized her. She doubled over with a cry of pain. Dr. Simmons pushed forward immediately, taking charge of the situation with calm efficiency. "Let's get you back to bed, Mrs. Prescott." "How far apart are the pains?" "Just minutes now," Winter gasped as the men helped her back to her bed. "The water broke right after Mr. Blackwell left." The doctor nodded grimly as he removed his coat and rolled up his sleeves. "Mr. Blackwell, I'll need hot water, clean towels, and whatever alcohol is available for sterilization. Then stoke that fire as high as it will go. We need this room warm." Cade moved with purpose, filling basins with the heated water from the kettle, locating towels in a chest, and finding a bottle of whiskey in a cabinet. As he built up the fire, he tried not to listen to Winter's cries of pain or the doctor's quiet, steady instructions to her. "Mr. Blackwell," Dr. Simmons called after examining Winter. "I need your assistance. The baby is in a difficult position." Cade approached the bed hesitantly, uncertain of his role in such an intimate moment. "Hold her shoulders," the doctor instructed. "Mrs. Prescott, when the next contraction comes, I need you to push with everything you have." Winter's eyes found Cade's, filled with fear and determination. She nodded, then grasped his offered hands. Her grip was surprisingly strong as the next pain overtook her, and she bore down with a primal cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. "That's it," Dr. Simmons encouraged. "Again with the next one." For the next hour, Cade remained at Winter's side, supporting her through each contraction, wiping her brow with a cool cloth between pains, and offering words of encouragement that seemed woefully inadequate against her suffering. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault, but inside, a different sort of storm raged as Winter fought to bring her child into the world. "I can't," she sobbed after a particularly brutal contraction that seemed to yield no progress. "I can't do this anymore." "Yes, you can," Cade said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. He leaned closer, his blue eyes fixed on hers. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Winter Prescott. This child of yours is lucky to have such a mother. Now show them that strength one more time." Something in his words reached her, and Winter nodded, gathering her remaining energy. With the next contraction, she pushed with renewed determination, her scream transforming into a roar of effort that culminated in a sudden release of pressure. "The head is out," Dr. Simmons announced. "One more push, Mrs. Prescott." Moments later, the cabin filled with the thin, angry cry of a newborn taking their first breath. Winter collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but alive with wonder as Dr. Simmons placed the squalling infant on her chest. "You have a son, Mrs. Prescott," the doctor said with a tired smile. "A healthy boy despite his early arrival." Tears streamed down Winter's face as she cradled the tiny, red-faced infant. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "You certainly know how to make an entrance." Cade found himself unexpectedly moved by the scene. He stepped back, giving mother and child their moment of first meeting, but Winter's voice stopped him. "Mr. Blackwell," she called softly. Please stay. I owe you more than I can ever repay." He turned back, suddenly aware of the intimacy of what they had shared. "No thanks needed, madam. Any decent man would have done the same. Few men would have ridden through that storm once, let alone twice," she replied, her eyes holding his with unmistakable gratitude. "My son and I would not have survived without you." Dr. Simmons, who had been quietly attending to the afterbirth and cleaning up, spoke up. "She's right, Blackwell. That was a fool's errand you undertook, but a brave one. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to examine the baby more thoroughly." As the doctor tended to the infant, Kade built up the fire again and prepared some food from Winter's supplies, a simple stew that would provide much-needed nourishment. The storm continued unabated outside, but within the cabin's walls, a sense of peace had descended. Later, as Winter rested with her son sleeping in a makeshift cradle beside her bed, Dr. Simmons pulled Kade aside. "The storm's not letting up," the doctor observed. "We won't be able to make it back to town tonight." Kade nodded. "I figured as much. We can bed down by the fire." "There's something else," Dr. Simmons added in a lower voice. "Mrs. Prescott lost quite a bit of blood. She's stable now, but I'm concerned about leaving her alone when her husband returns. She'll need help for at least a week, perhaps longer." Kade glanced at the sleeping woman, her face peaceful now but still bearing the marks of her ordeal. "What about the midwife from town?" "Martha Evans won't be able to make it out here until the trail's clear," the doctor replied. "That could be days, given this weather." A sense of responsibility settled over Kade. He had never been one to leave a job half done. "I'll stay until her husband returns," he decided. "Or until someone else can come." Dr. Simmons nodded, relief evident in his tired face. "I thought you might say that." "You're a good man, Blackwell, despite what some in town might say." Kade's expression hardened slightly at the reference to his reputation, but he made no comment. Instead, he moved to check on the horses, ensuring they were fed and as comfortable as possible in the cramped lean-to. When he returned, Winter was awake, nursing her son with a look of wonder on her face. She glanced up as Kade entered, but showed no embarrassment at her natural state. Frontier life left little room for excessive modesty. "He's perfect," she said softly, looking down at the infant. "I've decided to call him Samuel after my father." Kade nodded, keeping a respectful distance. "A good, strong name." "Dr. Simmons told me you're staying until Thomas returns," she continued, her eyes meeting his. "You've done more than enough already." "It's no trouble," Kade replied simply. "The storms made the decision for all of us, at least for tonight." Winter studied him for a moment, as if truly seeing him for the first time beyond the chaos of her labor. "You're not what I expected, Mr. Blackwell. Just Kade, please. And what did you expect, Mrs. Prescott?" A small smile touched her lips. "Winter, then, and I'm not sure. The way people in town talk sometimes, they make you sound dangerous." Kade's expression remained carefully neutral. "People talk, especially when they don't know the whole story." "And what is the whole story?" she asked, curiosity evident in her voice. "Not one for tonight," he answered quietly. "You need rest, not tales of a former bounty hunter's misadventures." Winter's eyebrows raised slightly at this revelation, but she didn't press further. Instead, she adjusted her sleeping son in her arms and said, "Well, whatever your past, Kade Blackwell, today you saved 2 lives. That's the story that matters to me." Something in her words, the simple acceptance without judgment, touched a place in Kade that had been closed off for years. He nodded once, unable to formulate a response, and moved to the window where he stood watch over the storm-ravaged night, listening to the soft breathing of mother and child behind him. The blizzard continued for 3 more days, trapping the unlikely trio in the small cabin. Dr. Simmons took the opportunity to rest and to teach Winter the basics of caring for her newborn son. Kade, meanwhile, took charge of more practical matters, chopping firewood from the diminishing pile near the cabin, preparing meals, and venturing out when the storm occasionally lessened to check for any sign of Thomas Prescott's return. On the morning of the fourth day, the storm finally broke, revealing a transformed landscape of pristine white under a brilliant blue sky. The temperature remained bitterly cold, but the sun's appearance lifted everyone's spirits. "I should get back to town, Doctor," Simmons announced after checking on Winter and Samuel once more. "There will be others needing attention after such a storm." Winter, who was sitting up in a chair near the fire with Samuel sleeping in her arms, looked concerned, but the trails must still be nearly impassable. "The main road should be manageable by now," Kade said from the doorway, having just returned from scouting the surrounding area. "I'll accompany the doctor to ensure he reaches town safely." Winter's eyes met his, a flash of alarm crossing her features before she composed herself. "You're leaving too?" Kade hesitated, noting her reaction with a curious warmth. "I'll return by nightfall," he promised, "just to make sure you and the little one are managing well." Relief visibly washed over her face. "Thank you, I would appreciate that." As they prepared for departure, Doctor Simmons took Kade aside. "She's healing well, but she's not out of danger yet. Watch for any signs of fever or increased bleeding, and make sure she rests. She's more stubborn than she appears." Kade nodded. "I've noticed." The doctor's shrewd eyes studied him. "And what else have you noticed, Mr. Blackwell?" Kade met his gaze steadily. "That she's a married woman with a newborn child, Doc. My intentions are honorable, just helping a neighbor in need." Dr. Simmons seemed satisfied with this response. "Good. Because that's a fine woman there, and she deserves nothing but respect." "On that, we are in complete agreement," Kade replied firmly. The journey to town was arduous but uneventful. The snow lay deep across the landscape, with drifts that in places required the horses to practically swim through the powdery white. Still, compared to the conditions during the storm, it was a manageable trek. In Wilcox, their arrival created something of a stir. Word of Kade's daring ride through the blizzard had already spread, transforming overnight into a tale that grew more dramatic with each telling. As they made their way down the main street toward the doctor's home, several townspeople approached to inquire after the Prescotts. "Is it true you rode 15 miles through the worst blizzard in a decade?" asked Frederick Miller, the owner of the general store. 7 miles, Fred, not 15, Kade corrected. "And Mrs. Prescott did the hard part. She has a healthy son now." Sheriff Dalton approached next, his weathered face serious beneath his hat. "Any sign of Thomas Prescott on your way in?" Kade shook his head. "Nothing. I'm heading back to the cabin after I see the doctor home." The sheriff nodded grimly. "I'll organize a search party." He might be holed up somewhere waiting out the storm, but if he tried to make it back. He left the rest unsaid. They all knew the dangers of being caught unprepared in such weather. After ensuring Dr. Simmons was safely home, Kade stopped at the general store to purchase supplies. He selected staples like flour, sugar, and coffee, along with some dried fruit and a small jar of honey, a luxury he thought might brighten Winter's recovery. He was reaching for his wallet when Miller waved him off. "Put your money away, Blackwell," the storekeeper said. "This one's on the house." "What you did?" "Well, it reminds folks that there's still good men in this territory." Kade, uncomfortable with the praise, nodded his thanks and gathered the supplies. As he was loading them onto his horse, he heard a familiar voice behind him. Kade Blackwell playing the hero. "Now there's something I never expected to see." He turned to find Wyatt Jenkins leaning against a hitching post, a smirk on his face. Jenkins was a cattle baron's son with more money than sense and a long-standing grudge against Cade. "Not in the mood, Jenkins," Cade said evenly, continuing to secure his packs. "Word is you've been playing house with the Prescott woman," Jenkins continued, his tone insinuating. Thomas barely gone a week and already he never finished the sentence. Cade moved with a speed that belied his exhaustion, grabbing Jenkins by the collar and slamming him against the wooden post. "Choose your next words very carefully," Cade said, his voice deadly quiet. "That woman nearly died bringing her child into this world. She deserves your respect, not your filthy implications." Jenkins' face had paled, but he managed a sneer. "Still the same hot-headed bounty hunter, eh, Blackwell? Some things never change." Cade released him with a disgusted shove. "Some things do. I suggest you change your tone when speaking of Mrs. Prescott, or we'll have a problem you won't walk away from." Without waiting for a response, Cade mounted Thunderbolt and turned the horse toward the trail leading back to the Prescott cabin, the townspeople's stares boring into his back as he rode away. The return journey gave him time to regret his loss of temper. He had worked hard over the past 2 years to build a different reputation in Wilcox, that of a skilled horse breeder and reliable rancher, not the dangerous bounty hunter he'd once been. One confrontation with Jenkins might undo all that progress. More troubling was his strong reaction to the implied slight against Winter. Cade had known her less than a week, yet he felt a powerful need to protect her honor. It was a complication he hadn't anticipated and wasn't entirely comfortable with. As the cabin came into view, Cade pushed these thoughts aside. His priority was ensuring Winter and her son were safe until Thomas returned or other arrangements could be made. He found Winter sitting by the window, Samuel sleeping peacefully in a cradle Cade had constructed from a wooden crate on their second day together. She looked up at his entrance, her face brightening. "You came back," she said, the relief in her voice unmistakable. "I said I would," he replied simply, setting down the supplies. "Any sign of Thomas?" Winter's expression fell slightly. "No, I'm beginning to worry that something has happened to him." Cade moved to stoke the fire. "The sheriff's organizing a search party. If Thomas tried to return during the storm, they'll find him." Winter nodded, absently stroking her sleeping child's cheek. "Did you speak with anyone in town? What are they saying?" Cade hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about the gossip that had already begun. "They're concerned for you and Thomas. Dr. Simmons is arranging for the midwife to visit once the trails are better." "And what about you?" Winter asked, her green eyes searching his face. "What are people saying about Kade Blackwell, the man who rode through ice to bring a doctor?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "They're exaggerating the story already. By next month I'll have fought off a pack of wolves while carrying the doctor on my back." Winter laughed, the sound surprisingly musical in the quiet cabin. "Well, what you actually did was remarkable enough." Cade shrugged uncomfortably and busied himself unpacking the supplies. When he revealed the jar of honey, Winter's eyes widened. "Honey? That must have cost a fortune after a storm like this." "Miller wouldn't accept payment," Cade admitted. "Consider it a gift for Samuel." Winter's expression softened. "You're a kind man, aren't you? Despite what you want people to believe." Before Cade could respond, a cry from the cradle diverted Winter's attention. As she lifted Samuel to nurse him, Cade excused himself to tend to the horses, needing space to collect his thoughts. Outside, in the biting cold of the late afternoon, Cade mentally berated himself. He was developing feelings for Winter Prescott, feelings that were completely inappropriate given her situation. She was vulnerable, alone, and married. His job was to protect her, not to develop an attachment that could only lead to complications. As he finished with the horses and prepared to chop more firewood, the sound of approaching riders caught his attention. Shielding his eyes against the low winter sun, he made out 3 figures on horseback coming up the trail. "Winter," he called, returning to the cabin. "Someone's coming." She looked up from where she had just finished nursing Samuel. "Thomas." "Can't tell yet," Kade replied, reaching for his rifle that stood near the door, a precaution born of years on the frontier. As the riders drew closer, Kade recognized Sheriff Dalton leading the group. Beside him rode an older man Kade didn't know, and behind them, slumped in his saddle but apparently unharmed, was Thomas Prescott. Winter gasped when Kade relayed this information, quickly arranging her clothing and moving toward the door with Samuel in her arms. Kade stepped back, suddenly acutely aware that his role in this household was about to end. Thomas Prescott was a lean, weathered man in his early 30s with a thick brown beard and tired eyes that lit up at the sight of his wife. He dismounted with the sheriff's assistance, his movements stiff from what appeared to be minor frostbite. "Winter," he called hoarsely, limping toward her. "Thank God you're all right." I tried to get back. His words died as he noticed the bundle in her arms. Winter moved forward, tears streaming down her face. "Thomas, meet your son. Samuel was born during the blizzard." Thomas stared in wonder at the infant, then enfolded both Winter and the child in a gentle embrace. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured, "when the storm hit so suddenly. I tried to make it back, but my horse went lame near Sweetwater Creek. If Ben Hollies hadn't found me holed up in his lined shack." He trailed off, finally seeming to register Kade's presence. "Who's this?" Sheriff Dalton stepped forward. "Thomas, this is Kade Blackwell. He's the man who rode through that hellish storm to bring Dr. Simmons to your wife. Saved both her and the baby by all accounts." Thomas's expression transformed from suspicion to profound gratitude. He released Winter and extended his hand to Kade. "Mr. Blackwell, there aren't words. Thank you for saving my family." Kade accepted the handshake, uncomfortable with the emotion visible in the other man's eyes. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Thomas said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most men would have thought twice about risking their lives in that storm. I owe you a debt I can never repay." Winter stepped forward, Samuel still cradled in her arms. "Kade stayed with us these past days, Thomas. He's been invaluable." Thomas nodded, clearly overwhelmed by the situation. "Please consider our home yours for as long as you need it. It's the least we can offer." Kade glanced at Winter, catching something unreadable in her expression before she lowered her eyes to her son. "That's generous but unnecessary," he replied. "Now that you're back, I should return to my own place." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Actually, Blackwell, if you could stay one more night, it would be helpful. Thomas needs medical attention for that frostbite, and I'd like to get him to Dr. Simmons first thing tomorrow. Ben here and I can take him in, but someone should stay with Mrs. Prescott until we return." Kade hesitated, torn between his desire to maintain distance from a situation growing increasingly complicated and his sense of obligation. In the end, the latter won out. "If the Prescotts are agreeable, I'll stay until tomorrow." Thomas nodded eagerly. "More than agreeable." "Winter, will you be all right if I go with the sheriff? The pain is getting worse and I don't want to risk losing any fingers." Winter's concern was evident, but she nodded. "Of course. Samuel and I will be fine with Kade. Go get treated." The arrangements were quickly made. Thomas took a few moments to properly meet his son, his weathered face softening with wonder as he held the tiny infant. Then, with obvious reluctance, he kissed Winter goodbye and departed with the sheriff and Ben Hollies, promising to return the following day. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, An awkward silence descended over the cabin. Kade busied himself preparing the evening meal while Winter settled Samuel in his cradle. "You didn't have to stay," she said finally, breaking the quiet. Kade glanced up from the stew he was stirring. "It makes sense. Thomas needs treatment and you shouldn't be alone yet." Winter studied him, her head tilted slightly. "Are you always so responsible, Kade Blackwell?" He gave a short laugh. "Hardly. Ask anyone who knew me 5 years ago." "And what would they say?" Kade's expression grew distant. "They'd say I was reckless, dangerous. A man who tracked others for money and didn't ask too many questions about whether they deserved what was coming." Winter considered this. "And now I breed horses and keep to myself," he replied. "It's a quieter life." "Is it better?" she asked softly. Kade met her gaze, struck again by the direct intelligence in her green eyes. "Mostly, though I sometimes miss the freedom of the open trail." Winter nodded as if she understood perfectly. "I was a school teacher in Philadelphia before I married Thomas," she offered. "Sometimes I miss the bustle of the city, the libraries and theater, but I wouldn't trade this life we're building." "How did you end up in Arizona territory?" Kade asked, genuinely curious. Winter smiled, the expression warming her tired face. "Thomas was visiting relatives back east. We met at a social function, and he spent the next 3 months convincing me that I belonged under western skies. He painted such a vivid picture of the life we could build here. I finally agreed." "You regret it?" The question slipped out before Kade could reconsider its propriety. Winter glanced down at Samuel, her expression softening. "Not for a moment. It's hard sometimes and lonelier than I expected, but it's real in a way Philadelphia never was. Every day matters out here." Her answer resonated with Kade in a way he hadn't anticipated. It articulated something he'd felt, but never expressed about his own choice to settle in the territory. They ate supper together, the conversation flowing more easily than before. Winter shared stories of her adjustment to frontier life, her first attempts at baking bread in the unpredictable wood stove, her astonishment at the vastness of the landscape, her determination to create a garden come spring. Kade found himself speaking more openly than was his custom, telling her about his horse breeding operation and his hopes to expand it in the coming years. As darkness fell and Winter prepared for bed, Kade made his bed near the fire as he had on previous nights. The routine was familiar now, but carried a different weight with the knowledge that Thomas would return tomorrow, ending this strange interlude in their lives. "Kade," Winter's voice came softly from her bed in the corner. "Yes, thank you. Not just for what you did during the storm, but for these days afterward. Having you here, it made me feel safe." Kade stared into the flames, a complicated mix of emotions churning within him. "You're welcome, Winter. Try to get some sleep. Samuel will likely wake you soon enough." She laughed softly. He certainly has his father's sense of timing. As predicted, Samuel woke several times during the night, his hungry cries piercing the quiet darkness. Kade, a light sleeper from years on the trail, would awaken each time, listening as Winter soothed her son with soft words and gentle touches. There was something profoundly intimate about these nighttime moments, even though Kade remained by the fire, giving mother and child their privacy. During one such awakening near dawn, Kade rose to add wood to the dying fire. As he moved quietly about the cabin, he caught Winter watching him, her expression thoughtful in the dim light. "I'll miss this," she said softly, "having someone else here during the night watches." Kade nodded, understanding her meaning. The isolation of their homestead would feel more pronounced once she was alone with Thomas and the baby during the long winter nights ahead. "Spring will come before you know it," he offered. The days will get longer and you'll be able to visit town more easily. Winter smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in it. Yes, and you'll go back to being a neighbor we see occasionally at church socials or in town. The words hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Kade knew he should agree, reinforce the appropriate boundaries between them. Instead, he found himself saying, "My ranch is only 5 miles southwest of here, if you ever need anything." "I'll remember," she replied, her eyes holding his for a moment too long before she looked down at her nursing son. Kade returned to his bedroll, but sleep eluded him for the remainder of the night. Morning brought clear skies and the promise of a warmer day. Kade rose early to tend to the horses and chop enough firewood to last several days. When he returned to the cabin, he found Winter dressed in her best available dress, her hair neatly arranged, clearly preparing for her husband's return. "You didn't have to do all that," she said, nodding toward the impressive woodpile he had created. "Wanted to be sure you had enough until Thomas is fully recovered," Kade replied, washing his hands in the basin. "The last thing he needs is to strain that frostbitten hand splitting logs." Winter nodded, then hesitated. "Will you stay for breakfast? Thomas and the sheriff probably won't arrive until midday." "Thank you, but I should get back to my own place," Kade said, knowing it was the right decision despite the disappointment that flashed across Winter's face. "My foreman has been handling things, but I've been gone nearly a week now." Winter accepted this with grace. "Of course, your responsibilities can't wait forever." As Kade gathered his few belongings, an awkward tension descended. Neither seemed to know how to properly end this unexpected chapter in their lives. Finally, Kade extended his hand formally. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Prescott, despite the circumstances. I wish you and your family well." Winter looked at his outstretched hand for a moment before ignoring it completely and stepping forward to embrace him. "Thank you, Kade," she whispered against his chest, "for everything." The embrace lasted only seconds before she stepped back, composing herself. "I'm sorry, that was improper." "No apology needed," Kade said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Take care of yourself and that boy of yours." With a final nod, he stepped out into the crisp morning air, mounted Thunderbolt, and rode away without looking back, though he felt Winter's gaze following him until the trail curved out of sight. The weeks that followed were busy ones for Kade. The blizzard had caused minor damage to several outbuildings on his ranch that required repair. 2 of his prized mares were due to foal in early spring, necessitating extra attention and preparation. He threw himself into the work, grateful for the physical exhaustion that allowed him to fall into dreamless sleep each night. Still, thoughts of Winter, Prescott, and her son intruded during quiet moments. He found himself wondering how they were faring, whether Thomas had recovered fully from his frostbite, whether Samuel was growing as robustly as his strong lungs had suggested he would. News reached him occasionally through his foreman, Jake, who visited Wilcox weekly for supplies. Thomas Prescott had indeed lost the tips of 2 fingers to frostbite, but was otherwise recovering well. The new mother and baby were reportedly thriving. Each such report brought Kade a measure of relief, tinged with an emotion he refused to name. January passed in a blur of cold days and long nights. February brought slightly milder weather, though winter still held the territory firmly in its grip. Kade maintained his usual routine of isolation, declining invitations to the occasional social gatherings in town. It was on a clear, cold day in late February that Thomas Prescott appeared at Kade's ranch, riding up to the main house just as Kade was returning from the stables. "Prescott," Kade greeted him with surprise. "Everything all right?" Thomas dismounted, removing his hat respectfully. He looked healthier than when Kade had last seen him, though the glove on his right hand couldn't quite hide the missing fingertips. "Mr. Blackwell," he began formally, "I've come to extend a proper invitation. Winter and I would be honored if you would join us for supper this Sunday. I've been meaning to express my gratitude more adequately, and Winter thinks it's high time we had you over properly." The mention of Winter's name sent an unwelcome jolt through Kade. He hesitated, searching for a polite way to decline. Thomas seemed to sense his reluctance. "Please, Mr. Blackwell, it would mean a great deal to us both, and Samuel is growing so fast he'll hardly recognize the man who helped bring him into this world." It was the mention of the child that weakened Kade's resolve. He found himself nodding. "Sunday, then. What time should I arrive?" "Around 4, if that suits you," Thomas replied, clearly pleased. "And thank you. Winter will be delighted." As Thomas rode away, Kade questioned the wisdom of his decision. The prudent course would be to maintain distance, to allow the connection forged during those intense days to fade naturally. Yet the thought of seeing Winter again, of meeting Samuel now that he had had time to grow and develop, proved too compelling to resist. Sunday arrived with unseasonably warm weather, a hint of the spring to come. Kade dressed in his best shirt and brushed Thunderbolt until the horse's coat gleamed in the afternoon sun. He debated bringing a gift, before settling on a small wooden horse he had carved during the long winter evenings, a toy for Samuel that wouldn't seem too personal or extravagant. The Prescott homestead looked different in the kinder light of approaching spring. The cabin seemed smaller somehow without the dramatic backdrop of the blizzard. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the chimney, and the door opened as Kade approached, revealing Winter with Samuel in her arms. "Kade," she called, her smile warm and genuine. "We were beginning to think you might not come." He dismounted, suddenly acutely aware of his appearance and manner. "Had a last-minute issue with one of the foals," he explained, approaching the porch. "Nothing serious." Winter stepped aside to let him enter. "Thomas is just finishing up some work in the back field. He should be here shortly." She shifted Samuel in her arms. "Would you like to hold him? He's much more substantial now than when you last saw him." Kade hesitated only briefly before setting down his hat and carefully taking the infant. Samuel had indeed grown, his once red face now rounded and his eyes more alert. He studied Kade with apparent interest, tiny fingers grasping at the air. "He's thriving," Kade observed, a surprising warmth spreading through his chest as the baby grabbed his finger with surprising strength. "Thanks to you," Winter said softly. "Dr. Simmons said neither of us might have survived without your intervention." Kade looked up from the child to find Winter watching him intently, her green eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite decipher. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken words. The sound of the back door opening broke the spell. Thomas entered, removing his work gloves. "Blackwell, glad you could make it." He crossed the room to shake Kade's hand, seemingly oblivious to the tension his arrival had dispelled. "I see you've reacquainted yourself with my son. Growing like a weed, isn't he?" "Indeed," Kade agreed, carefully returning Samuel to Winter's waiting arms. He produced the wooden horse from his pocket. "A small gift for the boy when he's older." Winter accepted it with evident appreciation. "It's beautiful, Kade. Did you make this?" He nodded, uncomfortable with her admiration. "Just something to pass the time during the winter evenings." "You're a man of many talents," Thomas observed good-naturedly. "Come, sit." "Winter's prepared quite a meal, and I've been looking forward to hearing more about your horse breeding operation. I might be in the market for a new mount come summer." The evening progressed pleasantly enough. The meal was indeed impressive given the limited supplies available in late winter, a savory stew with dumplings. fresh bread that Winter had clearly labored over, and preserved peaches for dessert. The conversation flowed easily as Thomas proved to be an engaging host, genuinely interested in Cade's knowledge of horses and full of plans for expanding his own modest homestead. Throughout the meal, Cade found his attention repeatedly drawn to Winter. She spoke less than her husband, but watched the interaction between the men with bright intelligence. Occasionally, their eyes would meet across the table, and something unspoken would pass between them before one or the other looked away. As the evening drew to a close, Thomas insisted on showing Cade some improvements he had made to the lean-to stable, leaving Winter to clear the table and tend to Samuel, who had begun fussing. Outside, in the crisp night air, Thomas's demeanor shifted subtly. "I never properly thanked you," he said seriously. "Not just for saving Winter and Samuel during the birth, but for staying afterward, for taking care of them when I couldn't." "You don't owe me any thanks," Cade replied uncomfortably. "I do," Thomas insisted. "And I want you to know that you'll always be welcome in our home, Blackwell. Winter speaks highly of you, says you were a perfect gentleman during those days you spent here." Something in Thomas's tone caught Cade's attention. Was there a question buried in that statement? A hint of insecurity? Cade met the other man's gaze directly. "Your wife is an extraordinary woman, Prescott. You're a fortunate man." Thomas studied him for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw in Cade's expression. "That I am. Shall we go back inside? It's getting cold." When they returned, Winter had settled Samuel in his cradle and was wiping her hands on her apron. "Would either of you like coffee before Cade leaves?" "Actually, I should be heading back," Cade said, reaching for his hat. "It's a fair ride and I have an early start tomorrow." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. "Of course. But don't be a stranger, Blackwell. We meant what we said about you being welcome any time." Winter walked him to the door while Thomas banked the fire for the night. "It was good to see you again," she said softly. "Samuel has changed so much since you last saw him." "He has," Cade agreed, settling his hat on his head. "You've done well with him." Winter hesitated, then said quietly, "I think of you often, Cade. Those days during the storm, they changed me somehow." Cade felt a dangerous tightening in his chest at her words. "Winter," she shook her head quickly. "I'm not saying anything improper, just that I'm grateful our paths crossed, even under such difficult circumstances." Before he could respond, she reached out and briefly touched his arm, a fleeting contact that nonetheless seemed to burn through the fabric of his shirt. "Good night, Cade. Ride safely." The ride back to his ranch gave Cade plenty of time to reflect on the evening. Winter's parting words and touch had stirred emotions he had been trying to suppress for weeks. The rational part of him knew that any feelings beyond friendship were inappropriate and potentially destructive. Winter was married to a good man who clearly adored her and their child. She had a family, a future laid out before her. And yet, there had been something in her eyes when she looked at him, something that suggested she too felt the inexplicable connection that had formed between them during those intense days. Spring arrived in earnest by mid-March, transforming the landscape with remarkable speed. The hills surrounding Wilcox turned green with new growth, and wildflowers dotted the meadows. Cade's predicted foals arrived, two healthy colts that showed promise of their sire's speed and dam's endurance. The improving weather brought increased activity to the region. The mines that formed the economic backbone of Wilcox resumed full operations, and ranchers began the spring roundup of cattle that had wintered in the lower valleys. Cade found himself drawn more frequently into town for supplies and business dealings. On these visits, he occasionally encountered the Prescotts. These meetings were always cordial, with Thomas invariably insisting that Cade join them for a meal soon, and Winter watching the exchange with a carefully composed expression that revealed nothing of her thoughts. Kade accepted one such invitation in early April, then another in May. Each visit reinforced both his admiration for Winter and his determination to maintain appropriate boundaries. He developed a genuine respect for Thomas Prescott, whose work ethic and dedication to his family were evident in everything he did. Samuel continued to grow and develop, learning to smile and laugh, his personality emerging more with each passing week. Kade found himself unexpectedly moved by the child's progress, taking quiet pride in the boy whose entry into the world he had played a role in ensuring. It was during a town social in late May that the delicate balance Kade had established was first truly tested. The entire community had gathered in the newly constructed town hall to celebrate the completion of the building, an important milestone for the growing settlement. There was music, dancing, and plentiful food contributed by the townswomen. Kade attended reluctantly, having been personally invited by Sheriff Dalton, who had become something of a friend in the months since the blizzard. He stood near the wall, nursing a glass of punch and watching the dancing with detached interest when Winter approached. She wore a simple blue dress that nonetheless flattered her figure, which had recovered its slenderness after Samuel's birth. Her auburn hair was arranged in a style more elaborate than her usual practical bun, with soft tendrils framing her face. "You look like you're plotting an escape route," she said with amusement, stopping beside him. Kade smiled despite himself. "That obvious?" "Only to someone who knows you," Winter replied. She glanced around the crowded room. Thomas has taken Samuel outside for some air. The noise was making him fussy. Kade nodded, acutely aware of her proximity in the crowded space. "He's growing fast. Soon he'll be running circles around you both." Winter laughed. "I can hardly believe he's almost 6 months old. The time has passed so quickly." Her expression grew more serious. "Yet in other ways it feels like a lifetime ago that you rode through that storm." Before Kade could respond, the musicians struck up a lively waltz. Winter glanced at the forming couples, then back to Kade. "Would you dance with me? Thomas won't mind, he'll be occupied with Samuel for a while yet." Every instinct warned Kade to decline. Dancing would mean physical contact, proximity that would only fuel the feelings he was trying to subdue. But the hopeful expression in Winter's eyes weakened his resolve. "I'm not much of a dancer," he warned, setting aside his punch. "Neither am I," Winter admitted with a smile. "We can be awkward together." The waltz was indeed somewhat awkward at first. Kade was conscious of maintaining a proper distance between them while still guiding Winter through the steps. Gradually, however, they found their rhythm, moving more fluidly among the other couples on the floor. "You lied," Winter accused lightly. "You dance quite well." "My mother insisted I learn," Kade admitted. "She had grand aspirations for me that didn't involve chasing bounties across the frontier." Winter studied him curiously. "You rarely speak of your family." "Not much to tell. They're back East Philadelphia, actually, like you. My father is a banker." "They had different plans for my life." "And do you regret disappointing them?" Winter asked, her directness catching him off guard. Kade considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but I wouldn't have fit in that world. Out here, a man is judged by his actions, not his pedigree or connections." Winter nodded. "I understand that appeal. It's part of what drew me west, though I didn't recognize it at the time." The music drew them closer, the rhythm requiring a tighter turn that momentarily pressed them against each other. Kade felt Winter's breath catch, saw the flush that rose to her cheeks as they separated to the appropriate distance. "Winter," he began, his voice low. "We should—" "I know," she interrupted, her eyes meeting his with a clarity that suggested she understood exactly what he had been about to say. But for this one dance, can we just be? The simple request undid him. For the remainder of the waltz, Kade allowed himself to simply experience the moment, the warmth of Winter's hand in his, the grace of her movement, the scent of lavender that clung to her hair. When the music ended, he released her reluctantly, stepping back with a formal bow that belied the tumult of his emotions. "Thank you for the dance, Mrs. Prescott," he said, deliberately using her formal title. Winter held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly proper. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell." As she turned to leave the dance floor, Kade caught sight of Thomas entering the hall with Samuel in his arms. Thomas waved cheerfully, apparently having witnessed the end of their dance without concern. Kade nodded in acknowledgement, then made his way to the exit, suddenly needing the coolness of the night air to clear his head. Outside, he leaned against the building, staring up at the star-filled sky. The situation was becoming untenable. His feelings for Winter were growing despite his best efforts to suppress them, and the dance had only confirmed what he had been denying for months. He needed to create more distance, to limit their interactions until these inappropriate emotions subsided. The decision made, Kade returned briefly to the social to make his excuses to Sheriff Dalton before riding home, his thoughts in turmoil despite his resolution. For the next month, Kade deliberately avoided town when he knew the Prescotts might be there. He declined an invitation to Sunday dinner, citing a mare that required constant attention. He threw himself into his work, expanding his breeding operation and taking on the breaking of several wild mustangs for neighboring ranchers' dangerous work that left him too exhausted at day's end for brooding thoughts. His strategy might have succeeded if not for the events of late June. A wildfire, sparked by lightning in the drought-dry hills west of town, quickly grew into a serious threat to outlying homesteads. Sheriff Dalton organized firefighting crews, and Kade joined without hesitation, knowing that his knowledge of the terrain could be valuable. For 3 days, they battled the blaze, digging fire breaks and conducting controlled burns to create defensible spaces around the most vulnerable properties. Smoke filled the valley, turning day into an eerie twilight and making breathing difficult even for those not directly fighting the flames. It was during the night of the 3rd day that Kade overheard a conversation that sent ice through his veins despite the nearby inferno. Winds shifting. One of the men was saying to Sheriff Dalton, "If it keeps up, the Prescott place will be directly in the path by morning." "Thomas knows," the sheriff replied grimly. "I sent a rider out there earlier to warn them. He's gathering what he can, but with a baby and all." Kade didn't wait to hear more. He found his exhausted horse, mounted, and rode through the smoke-choked night toward the Prescott homestead, pushing Thunderbolt harder than was wise given the poor visibility and the horse's fatigue. He arrived to find Thomas loading a wagon with their most valuable possessions while Winter hurried between the cabin and the vehicle, carrying armfuls of supplies and necessities. Samuel was strapped to her back in a makeshift sling, whimpering at the acrid smoke that hung in the air. "Blackwell," Thomas called in surprise as Kade dismounted. "What are you doing here?" "Heard the fire's changing course," Kade replied, immediately moving to help with the loading. "How much time do you think we have?" Thomas glanced nervously at the orange glow visible over the nearest ridge. "Not long. The wind's picking up and these pines will go up like tinder once the embers reach them." Winter approached, relief evident on her smoke-smudged face. "Kade, thank God. Samuel's been crying non-stop and we still have so much to load." Without hesitation, Kade reached for the child. "Let me take him. You finish gathering what you need." Winter transferred Samuel to Kade's arms, their hands brushing in the process. The baby's cries subsided somewhat as Kade held him securely, speaking in a low, soothing voice that seemed to calm the frightened infant. For the next half hour, they worked frantically to salvage what they could. The approaching fire created an otherworldly backdrop, the night sky glowing orange, ash falling like corrupted snow, and the distant roar growing steadily louder. "That's all we can take," Thomas finally declared, securing the last bundle. "We need to go now." Winter looked back at the cabin with naked anguish. This was their home, built with Thomas's hands, the place where her son had been born. Kade saw the moment she accepted its likely loss, her shoulders straightening as she turned toward the wagon. "I'll ride ahead," Kade said, handing Samuel back to Winter. "Make sure the trail is clear to town." Thomas nodded gratefully. "We'll be right behind you." The journey to Wilcox was tense but uneventful. The town had organized shelter for those displaced by the fire, and the Prescotts were quickly settled in the church basement alongside several other families. Kade stayed long enough to ensure they had everything they needed before returning to join the firefighting efforts. By dawn, a miraculous shift in the wind had pushed the fire north, away from both the town and most of the outlying homesteads. By midday, the first rainfall in weeks began, a gentle shower that gradually increased to a steady downpour that extinguished the remaining hotspots by nightfall. When Kade finally returned to town, exhausted and soot-covered, he learned that the Prescott cabin had been spared. The fire had come within a quarter-mile before the rain halted its advance. The news brought him immense relief, though he was too tired to seek out the family and tell them personally. Instead, he collapsed in his own bed, sleeping for nearly 18 hours straight. He was awakened by a knock at his door. Groggy and disoriented, Kade pulled on his trousers and shirt before answering, surprised to find Winter standing on his porch, Samuel asleep in her arms. "Winter," he said, immediately alert despite his fatigue. "Is everything all right?" Thomas is fine," she assured him quickly. "He's back at the cabin, assessing any damage from the smoke. I wanted to thank you personally for your help during the evacuation." Kade ran a hand through his disheveled hair, acutely aware of his unkempt appearance. "No thanks necessary. I'm just glad your place survived." Winter nodded, shifting Samuel slightly in her arms. "May I come in? Just for a moment. Samuel's getting heavy and I've ridden quite a way." The request set off warning bells in Kade's mind, but refusing seemed impossible. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter the modest main room of his ranch house. Winter settled into a chair, adjusting Samuel, who continued to sleep peacefully against her shoulder. She looked around with evident interest. "I've wondered what your home was like." The simple statement carried an intimacy that made Kade uncomfortable. He remained standing, maintaining what he hoped was a respectful distance. "It's not much, just what I need." Winter's eyes found his, direct as always. "You've been avoiding us, Kade. Why?" The bluntness of the question caught him off guard. He considered deflecting but found he couldn't lie to her. "You know why, Winter." She held his gaze, neither confirming nor denying his implication. "I've missed our conversations. Thomas has too." "Winter," Kade said, his voice low but firm. We can't." "I know," she replied softly. "I know exactly what we can't do, Kade. I'm a married woman with a child. I made vows that I intend to honor. Thomas is a good man who loves me and Samuel more than anything." "Then why are you here?" Kade asked, the question harsher than he intended. Winter stood carefully, mindful of her sleeping son. "Because I needed to see you. To thank you, yes, but also to clear the air between us. This feeling. It doesn't have to destroy the friendship that matters to us both, to all three of us." Kade remained silent, processing her words. There was truth in them, but also danger. Could they truly maintain a friendship when something more powerful simmered beneath the surface? "I should go," Winter said after a moment, moving toward the door. "Thomas will be wondering where we've gone." Kade stepped forward to open the door for her, and as she passed, their proximity sent a now familiar jolt through him. Winter paused, looking up at him with an expression that mirrored his own conflict. "Be well, Kade," she said softly. "And know that whatever happens, what you did for us during that blizzard will never be forgotten, not just by me, but by Samuel. He'll grow up knowing the kind of man you are." With that, she stepped outside into the bright summer morning, leaving Kade standing in the doorway, watching as she mounted her horse with practiced ease despite the child in her arms, and rode back toward her home and husband. The encounter left Kade troubled yet oddly at peace. Winter had acknowledged the unspoken attraction between them, but had also reaffirmed her commitment to her marriage. It was both a closing of a door and an opening of another, the possibility that they might find a way to remain in each other's lives without crossing boundaries that would bring pain to all involved. In the months that followed, Kade gradually allowed himself to resume normal interactions with the Prescott family. He accepted occasional dinner invitations, brought a special saddle he'd had made for Samuel's first birthday, and even helped Thomas with the harvest of their modest wheat crop in early fall. These interactions were not without moments of tension. A glance held too long, a brush of hands when passing a dish at dinner, a shared memory of those intense days during the blizzard that only they fully understood. But over time, the acute pain of unfulfilled longing began to subside, replaced by a deeper appreciation for the friendship that had grown between them all. Thomas, whether aware of the complex emotions between his wife and their neighbor or not, treated Kade with unfailing warmth and respect. His genuine nature made it impossible for Kade to harbor any resentment toward him. Indeed, as the months passed, Kade found himself valuing Thomas's friendship almost as much as he cherished his connection with Winter. Samuel's growth and development became a source of joy for Kade. The boy's first steps, taken during a Sunday dinner at the Prescott cabin in early November, brought tears to Winter's eyes and genuine delight to both Thomas and Kade. When the child spoke his first clear word, "Mama," at Christmas, the celebration was shared by all three adults with equal pride. As Samuel's second birthday approached in December of 1886, Kade found himself reflecting on the remarkable journey they had all taken since that fateful blizzard. The acute, almost painful awareness of Winter had gradually transformed into something deeper, but less consuming, a love that had found its proper channel in genuine concern for her happiness and that of her family. The night before Samuel's birthday, Kade sat alone by his fire, carving the final touches on a wooden rocking horse he had spent months creating for the boy. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the product of countless evening hours and a desire to give Samuel something that would last for years. A knock at his door interrupted his work. Surprised by a visitor so late and in such cold weather, Kade set aside the carving and answered cautiously, only to find Thomas Prescott stamping snow from his boots on the porch. "Thomas," Kade greeted him with surprise, "is everything all right?" "Fine, fine," Thomas assured him, though there was a tension in his manner that belied the words. "May I come in? It's bitter out here." Kade stepped aside, welcoming him in from the cold. "Of course, coffee, something stronger." "Whiskey if you have it," Thomas replied, removing his coat and hat. His gaze fell on the rocking horse. "That for Samuel. It's magnificent, Kade." "Just a small gift," Kade said, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey and handing one to his visitor. "He's growing so fast now." Thomas nodded, taking a deep drink before settling into a chair by the fire. 2 years, he mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that blizzard hit, and sometimes it feels like another lifetime. Kade sat opposite him, suddenly wary of the direction this conversation might take. A lot has happened since then. Thomas studied him for a moment, then said quietly, "I never told you that I was awake that night, did I, when you returned with Dr. Simmons?" Cade's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I was in Tucson when the storm hit," Thomas explained, his gaze fixed on the fire. "I tried to get back, but my horse went lame about 10 miles out. I found shelter in an abandoned line shack and waited out the worst of it. When it let up enough, I continued on foot, leading my horse." He paused, taking another sip of whiskey. "I reached our cabin just after nightfall. Through the window I could see Winter in labor, you and the doctor helping her. I heard my son's first cry from outside my own home." Kade was stunned by this revelation. "Why didn't you come in?" Thomas smiled sadly. "Because in that moment, I was a stranger looking in on a family. You three had formed a bond in that crisis that I wasn't part of. So I waited, watched long enough to see that Winter and the baby were safe, then went to the neighbor's place and collapsed from exhaustion. Ben Hollies found me there the next morning." "Thomas," Kade began, unsure what to say to this extraordinary confession. Thomas held up a hand. "I'm not telling you this to make you uncomfortable, Kade. I'm telling you because tomorrow is my son's birthday, and I wanted you to know that I've always been aware of the unique connection you share with my family with Winter." Kade tensed, bracing for an accusation or confrontation that he wasn't sure how to address. Instead, Thomas continued in the same calm tone. "I've watched you these past 2 years, Kade, watched how you look at my wife, how she looks at you. I've seen the care you both take to never cross lines that would destroy what we've all built together. Thomas, I swear to you, nothing improper has ever happened between Winter and me," Kade said firmly. "I know," Thomas replied with surprising gentleness. "That's why I'm here tonight, to thank you not just for saving them during the blizzard, but for the integrity you've shown since. A lesser man would have taken advantage of the situation, might have tried to come between us." Kade shook his head. "Winter loves you, Thomas. She always has. And Samuel needs his father. And they both need you too in a different way," Thomas said. "That's what I've come to understand. Which is why I wanted to speak with you before tomorrow's celebration." He reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew an envelope, which he handed to Kade. "I've acquired the Henderson property that adjoins both our lands. 200 acres with good water access and that stand of pines we've both admired. I'd like you to have it." Kade stared at the deed in disbelief. "Thomas, I can't accept this. It's too valuable." "It's not a gift," Thomas clarified. "It's a partnership offer. Winter and I want to expand our operation beyond what I can manage alone. You know horses better than anyone in the territory. Together, we could build something significant, something for Samuel's future." The proposal took Kade completely by surprise. "You want us to work together?" "To combine our operations," Thomas nodded, his expression earnest. "It makes sense practically. Our lands would connect perfectly with the Henderson parcel. Your expertise with horses complements my skills with cattle and crops. But more than that, Kade, I want my son to know the man who helped bring him into this world, to learn from him as he grows." Kade was speechless, overwhelmed by both the generosity of the offer and its implications for their future relationship. Thomas finished his whiskey and stood. "You don't need to answer tonight. Think about it. Discuss it with us tomorrow after Samuel's birthday celebration." He paused, then added more quietly, "Winter doesn't know I'm here. I wanted to approach you man to man first." As Thomas prepared to leave, Kade found his voice. "Why, Thomas? Why would you want to bind your family more closely to me, knowing what you know?" Thomas turned at the door, his expression thoughtful. Because life is too short and too hard out here to reject genuine connections when they form. My father taught me that true strength isn't in pretending feelings don't exist, but in finding the right way to honor them. With that profound statement, he donned his hat and coat. See you tomorrow, partner. Around noon. Kade nodded, still processing the conversation. I'll be there. After Thomas left, Kade sat for hours by the fire, contemplating the unexpected turn of events. The deed lay on the table before him, representing not just valuable land, but a future he had never dared imagine, one where he remained connected to Winter and Samuel without compromising his integrity or their family structure. The next day dawned clear and cold, a perfect December morning reminiscent of the one 2 years earlier when Samuel had entered the world. Kade loaded the rocking horse carefully into his wagon and made the journey to the Prescott homestead with a curious mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. The celebration was a simple but joyous affair. Samuel, now a sturdy toddler with Winter's green eyes and Thomas's determined chin, was initially shy with Kade until the rocking horse was revealed. His delighted squeals as Thomas placed him on the lovingly crafted toy brought smiles to everyone's faces. Winter, watching her son rock back and forth with increasing confidence, met Kade's eyes across the room. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "You must have worked on it for months." "Since summer," Kade admitted. "I wanted it to be special." "It is," she assured him, her hand briefly touching his arm, a gesture of gratitude that held the warmth of their unique bond without crossing into impropriety. After the meal and cake, as Samuel played contentedly with his new toys, Thomas brought out a bottle of fine brandy he'd been saving for the occasion. "I have an announcement," he said, pouring 3 small glasses. "As some of you already know, I've acquired the Henderson property that connects our lands." He handed glasses to Winter and Kade. "I've proposed a partnership to Kade, a joining of our operations that would benefit us all, especially Samuel as he grows." Winter's eyes widened in surprise, darting between her husband and Kade. "A partnership," Thomas nodded. "Kade's expertise with horses, combined with our cattle and crops, it makes good business sense, and it would give Samuel 2 strong men to learn from as he grows." Winter's expression was unreadable for a moment before a slow smile spread across her face. "It's a wonderful idea," she said, her voice steady though Kade detected a slight tremor in it. "If Kade agrees, of course." All eyes turned to Kade, who found himself at a crossroads he had never anticipated. The decision before him was about more than land or business. It was about family, connection, and the kind of future he wanted to build. Looking at the 3 faces before him, Thomas's open and expectant, Winter's cautiously hopeful, and little Samuel's innocent and trusting, he felt a certainty settle over him. "To partnership," he said, raising his glass, "and to family in all its forms." The toast was echoed by Thomas and Winter, their glasses clinking together in a moment that seemed to Kade to represent not an ending, but a beginning, a new chapter in a story that had started 2 years earlier in the midst of a blizzard. As the afternoon light began to fade and Samuel dozed off in his mother's arms, exhausted from the excitement of the day, Kade found himself standing on the porch with Winter while Thomas settled the child in his bed. "Did you know about Thomas's plan?" Kade asked quietly. Winter shook her head. "Not until today. It's like him, though, to find a practical solution to an emotional situation." Kade glanced at her. "And how do you feel about it?" Winter considered the question carefully before answering. "I think it's right," she said finally, "for all of us. These past 2 years, watching you with Samuel, seeing the friendship grow between you and Thomas despite everything, it's shown me that family isn't always what we expect it to be." She turned to face him fully. "I won't pretend there hasn't been something between us, Kade. Something that, in another life, might have been different. But this is the life we have, the one where you rode through ice to bring a doctor to a woman you'd never met, where my son was born in a blizzard, where my husband is wise enough to recognize the value of keeping you in our lives." Kade nodded, understanding her perfectly. "It's a good life, Winter." "It is," she agreed, her smile genuine and warm. "And it's about to get even better, I think." Thomas joined them on the porch, wrapping an arm around Winter's waist in a gesture that spoke of their solid bond. "Samuel's out like a light. Too much excitement for one day." The three of them stood in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. In that moment, Kade felt a sense of belonging he had searched for his entire life, not the passionate connection he had once imagined with Winter, but something equally precious. A family bound together by choice rather than blood, by shared experiences and mutual respect. "I should head back," he said eventually. "Early start tomorrow if we're going to begin planning this partnership properly." Thomas extended his hand. "Until tomorrow, then." As Kade rode home through the crisp winter night, he reflected on the strange path that had led him to this point. 2 years earlier, he had been a solitary man with a troubled past, seeking redemption in the isolated life of a horse breeder. Now, he was connected to a family in a way he had never thought possible, not as a husband or father, but as something equally vital. The stars above seemed particularly bright, reminding him of that terrible blizzard night when he had ridden through ice and snow, driven by nothing more than a stranger's need. He couldn't have known then that the journey would transform not just Winter's life, but his own. As his ranch came into view, Kade felt a sense of peace settle over him. The love he felt for Winter Prescott would always be part of him, but it had evolved into something that enhanced rather than threatened her marriage, a connection that strengthened all of them rather than pulling them apart. In the years that followed, the partnership flourished beyond any of their expectations. The combined operation became one of the most successful in the territory, known for quality horses, cattle, and crops. Samuel grew into a strong, capable young man who inherited his mother's intelligence, his father's work ethic, and Kade's affinity for horses. Winter and Thomas's family expanded to include 2 more children, a daughter, Elizabeth, born in 1889, and another son, James, who arrived in 1892. Kade was present for both births, though under much less dramatic circumstances than Samuel's arrival. Kade himself never married, though not for lack of opportunity. His success and reputation attracted interest from eligible women in Wilcox and beyond. But he found his fulfillment in his work and in his unique role within the extended Prescott family. He became Uncle Kade to all 3 children, a beloved fixture at family gatherings and an essential part of their daily lives. On Samuel's 18th birthday in December of 1902, as they celebrated around the same table where so many important moments had been shared, Thomas raised a toast that brought tears to Winter's eyes and a lump to Kade's throat. "To Samuel, a man now," Thomas began, his once dark hair now liberally streaked with silver, "and to the blizzard that brought him into this world and brought Kade into our lives. Some might call it misfortune to have a child born in such conditions, but I call it the greatest blessing this family has ever known." Samuel, now tall and strong with his father's build and his mother's expressive eyes, stood to offer his own toast. "To Uncle Kade," he said, raising his first legal glass of whiskey, "who rode through ice to bring the doctor and stayed to become family. Thank you for showing me that courage isn't just facing danger, but facing life with an open heart." As Winter's eyes met Kade's across the table, There was an entire unspoken history between them of what might have been, what was, and what had grown from the choices they had all made. Her smile held no regret, only gratitude and the deep affection that had sustained their unique bond through 18 years of shared life. Later that evening, as Kade prepared to ride back to his own home, still separate though only a short distance away, Winter walked him to his horse, just as she had done countless times over the years. 18 years, she mused, her breath visible in the cold December air. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that you appeared at our door in that blizzard. Kade nodded, adjusting his saddle. Best wrong turn I ever took. Winter laughed softly. Was it really a wrong turn, or exactly where you were meant to be? Kade considered this, looking back at the warm, light-filled home where Thomas was playing checkers with their younger son while Elizabeth helped Samuel try on the new boots they had given him for his birthday. I think we ended up exactly where we were all supposed to be, Winter, he said finally. Wouldn't change a thing. Winter's hand found his briefly a touch that after all these years still carried meaning but had lost its dangerous edge. Neither would I, Kade, not a single moment. As he rode home under a star-filled sky remarkably similar to the one that had witnessed his desperate ride 18 years earlier, Kade Blackwell reflected on the unexpected journey of his life. He had once believed that love meant possession, passion, exclusivity. The Prescotts had taught him otherwise, that love could be generous, expansive, inclusive. The young man who had ridden through a blizzard to save a stranger had found not just redemption but family. It wasn't the conventional path, but as he looked back over the rich tapestry of shared experiences of births and harvests, triumphs and setbacks, growth and change, Kade knew with certainty that it was the right one. In the distance, the lights of his home beckoned, no longer a solitary outpost, but an extension of the family whose bonds transcended conventional definitions. Tomorrow would bring Samuel to his ranch, to begin learning the horse breeding business in earnest, the first step in passing on the legacy they had all built together. Kade smiled to himself, grateful for the storm that had changed everything, for the woman who had shown him the true meaning of love, and for the man who had had the wisdom and generosity to create space for that love to exist in its own unique form. Some might not understand the family they had created, this unconventional circle of deep affection and respect, but Kade no longer cared what others might think. What mattered was the truth they all knew, that sometimes the most profound love stories weren't written in grand passion or traditional vows, but in the quiet daily acts of choosing each other, again and again, through all of life's seasons. The cowboy who had once ridden through ice to bring a doctor had found his home not in a place, but in the hearts of those whose lives had become inextricably intertwined with his own. And in that knowledge, Kade Blackwell had discovered a happiness more enduring than he had ever dared to imagine.